Tonight on PBS News Weekend, Russia launches a barrage of drones into Ukraine just hours after President Trump raises doubts about Putin's commitment to peace. Then, as President Trump's second term approaches day 100, we examine the most controversial and consequential moments and how global warming may be endangering a treasure trove of cultural artifacts in remote Alaska.
The objects we're finding are important not just to local folks and their heritage, but to our collective heritage as humans.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS News Weekend. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
The ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. Russia continues its deadly assaults on Ukraine, overnight launching a sweeping drone attack that killed at least 4 people. It comes a day after President Trump met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the Vatican before Pope Francis's funeral. Both described the discussion in positive terms. After that meeting, Mr. Trump took to social media to criticize Russian leader Vladimir Putin. There was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities, and towns. It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along. William Taylor is a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. He was U.S. ambassador to Ukraine under George W. Bush and the temporary head of mission there in the first Trump administration, later testifying in Mr. Trump's impeachment. Mr. Taylor, what do you make of that social media post saying that maybe Putin is just tapping him along?
So, John, I think the president is realizing after that evidence of these attacks and other attacks on religious holidays that we know 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, and we know actually the discussion that President Trump had with President Zelensky, for the first time, a direct, unfiltered conversation between the two presidents, that President Trump is realizing that President Putin may not be serious about this negotiation, about stopping this war. I believe that Putin is not serious about stopping this war, but I think the president may be coming to that same conclusion.
Do you think it was significant that yesterday at the Vatican, there was also French President Macron, British Prime Minister Starmer, who they huddled briefly together, but they were also there?
I do. I think all three of those leaders, British, French, and Ukrainian, having a direct conversation with President Trump, has been able to impress on President Trump the importance of a fair and just and durable peace. And that President Putin, I'm sure President Trump heard, President Putin is not a part of that solution. President Putin started this war and he can end it, but only if he's pressured to do so. And I imagine that's what the French and British told him, and I'm sure that's what President Zelensky told him.
On that pressure, the president also wondered in his post if Putin has to be handled differently through banking or secondary sanctions. What could the administration do in those areas that it's not already doing?
The administration can certainly put secondary sanctions on those nations that buy oil from Russia. Russia is heavily dependent on oil exports, and Russia sells a lot of oil to the Chinese and to the Indians. And so putting sanctions on the Chinese and the Indians, if they continue to buy the oil from Russia that funds the war effort, that could happen. That's number one. Number two, there are sanctions. There are banks that have not been sanctioned yet under the existing regime. So there are more sanctions that could be put on. There are ways to make the existing sanctions more effective. There's a shadow fleet that the Russians use to export their oil, and there are ways to crack down on that shadow fleet to be sure that that goes away. That is, that revenue stops flowing into the Russian treasury, and that will stop the Russian war machine. Now, that's also a part of the vulnerability that President Putin understands he has. So this is a real vulnerability that could make President Putin come to the table.
What's your sense of where this goes from here?
I think that the administration, after these conversations of yesterday, understands that this is hard. This is difficult. And I believe we're getting indications that they recognize it's not going to be done in days. And they ought to take some extra time to listen to the Ukrainian point of view, listen to the European point of view, and adjust their proposal. Many observers recognize that the proposal that the Americans have presented to the Europeans, but also to the Ukrainians and to the Russians, is very favorable to the Russians. President Trump, having heard yesterday from the leaders of Britain and France and Ukraine, can adjust that proposal with some time and then take it back to the Russians. So I think those are the next steps.
Former Ambassador Mr. William Taylor, thank you very much.
John, thank you for having me.
In tonight's other news, Vancouver police have ruled out terrorism in a Saturday night incident where a man plowed his car into a crowd of people at a Filipino heritage festival. At least 11 people were killed and more than 20 others injured. After the vehicle came to a halt, bystanders held the 30-year-old suspect until police arrived. Police say the man has a history of interactions with law enforcement and mental health professionals. They say the death toll could rise as some of the injuries are life-threatening. Israeli jets struck Beirut's southern suburbs today, the third time since a November ceasefire between the Israeli military and Hezbollah. Jets could be heard over the city, and there were 2 warning strikes. Then Israel hit an area where they said Hezbollah stored precision missiles. Hezbollah has long had widespread support and influence in Beirut's southern suburbs. Pakistani security forces killed dozens of militants they say were trying to sneak into the country from Afghanistan. Pakistan claims the group was part of the Pakistani Taliban, known as TTP, which they say is carrying out high-profile attacks in Pakistan from safe havens inside Afghanistan. TTP members have found sanctuary in Afghanistan since the Taliban's takeover there 4 years ago. And Pope Francis's tomb at the St. Mary Major Basilica opened to the public today. Thousands of mourners lined up early to pay their respects inside the church located in Rome's most multicultural neighborhood. Francis's final resting place is a sparse white tomb, simply marked with his name in Latin.
There's so much intensity. He was a person close to everyone, so we respect him for what he did, each in our own way.
And an estimated 200,000 people attended a special mass honoring Francis in St. Peter's Square. Today is the second of 9 days of official mourning before cardinals meet to elect the new pope. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, we look back at President Trump's eventful first 100 days in office and how warming Arctic temperatures may be eroding history.
This is PBS News Weekend from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
Tomorrow is the end of voting in Canada to elect a new prime minister. The big issue in this campaign has been U.S.-Canadian relations, especially President Trump's tariffs. The 2 frontrunners are Liberal Party leader and current Prime Minister Mark Carney and Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre. Since the beginning of the year, opinion polls have gone from showing a commanding Conservative Party lead to a narrower but consistent Liberal Party lead. David Frum is a writer for The Atlantic and host of the podcast The David Frum Show. He's a native and part-time resident of Canada. David, more than 20 percentage point swing from the beginning of the year to now. What happened?
Let's talk about first why the Conservatives were so far ahead. Under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the Liberals have governed Canada for a decade, since 2015. Economic progress has been disappointing over those 10 years. Productivity growth was slow. Incomes did not rise. The Trudeau strategy for overcoming this poor performance of the economy productively was to invite many more immigrants to come, to make at least the economy bigger. Canada's immigration rates were already high. He effectively doubled it. So Canadians find themselves poor economic performance, huge inflow of immigrants, rising housing prices, much disappointment. That put the Conservatives ahead until Trump began to open his mouth.
And talk about that. What happened after Trump, as you put it, Trump opened his mouth?
Well, Canada and the United States have a $1 trillion trading relationship. Obviously, there are always frictions, and they always have to be resolved. And traditionally, they've been resolved through negotiation, amicably, and in the context of a relationship that's also about security, policing, environmental. It's an excellent relationship almost all the time. Trump began to put demands on Canada, and they weren't rational demands. And that has, of course, rallied Canadian opinion to the flag and made Canadians look around to say, which politician seems least like Donald Trump? And that's the guy we're going to back.
Tell us about the two leaders who are likely to be, one of them will be the new prime minister, Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre.
The Conservative Party leader has been leader for a while. He's a very dynamic House of Commons performer. He had made his mark on the issue, above all, of housing prices. And he'd appealed strongly to younger voters who have been priced out of housing markets, especially in Vancouver and Toronto. And that was the core of his message. Economic change, accelerate economic growth, bring down housing prices so you can start a family. But the Conservatives also have a minority within the Conservative Party that has responded to some Trump-like themes. And so Canadians sense the Conservatives weren't as anti-Trump as Canadian voters were at a time when Trump was saying, I want to destroy Canada. And so Mark Carney, who's a banker who's never run for any office before, stepped in as the clean face of the Liberals, replaced Justin Trudeau, and is saying, I will stand up to Trump, and I will deliver the kind of more economic nationalism of a Canadian variety. Someone is going to say no to Trump, and they're not so sure that the Conservatives would say no to everything.
When Americans hear liberal and conservative, they think they're analogous to the Democrats and Republicans. Is that right?
That's not at all right. So the Liberal Party of Canada is the most effective political organization in the democratic world. They've held, out of the past 100 years, they are all about winning. They are very unlike the Democrats. And there is not a thing they stand for that they wouldn't turn it upside down if it helped them win votes. The Conservative Party is a much more regionally based party. It's a much more fractious party. And it's got a higher floor of supporters, but a lower ceiling. And it's a much less ideological party than the American Republicans. So the Liberals, much more ruthless than the Democrats. The Conservatives, much less ideological than the Republicans. That's why you can have such a big movement of votes, because it's not that polarized a country, not that ideological a party system.
We've had record early voting in Canada. Does that reflect voter interest?
It reflects two things. First, the turnout is going to be high. There's also been a trend in Canada for the vote to splinter into smaller parties, regional parties, Green parties, the left-wing NDP. This election looks like to be a reconcentration in the two big parties, Liberals and Conservatives, in a way Canada hasn't seen at least since the 1980s, maybe not since the 1950s.
David Frum in Canada, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tuesday marks the end of the first 100 days of the second Trump presidency. Since Franklin Roosevelt's first term, it's been a traditional time to take stock of a new administration. Matthew Dallek is a political historian and professor at George Washington University. Well, how would you assess these first 100 days?
It has been, I think it has been a historic 100 days. The amount of executive action that has happened. So the target of the Trump administration, I think, has been the very core of modern liberalism. The actions are rooted, I think, in an older form of conservatism, tariffs, a kind of protectionism, anti-immigrant policy, the attacks on science and public health, ideas that were popular in the 1920s and 30s. The first 100 days also have crystallized, I think, the inadequacies of the post-Watergate reforms to curb the abuses of executive power. I think I agree with those who say we've gotten a taste of what it is like to live in a kind of American authoritarian state.
Should any of this surprise us, though? Didn't he run on a lot of these things?
He did run on a lot of these things, but the particular form that it has taken it's not surprising, but there is a level, I think, of shock. So think about, for example, the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, his team, they've gone into federal agencies, they've closed them down, they've cut tens of thousands of staff, they've gutted some agencies, and all without the Congress, right? Really upended the idea and the laws about the Congress having the power of the purse.
Not only Congress, but also the courts, their reaction to the Kilmer Abrego Garcia cases. What does this say about how they view or address the two other branches of government?
Well, this, I think, has been one of the most striking things of the first 100 days, which is that they've had very little use for the other two branches. With Congress, they have a Republican Congress, and yet they have not enacted, I would argue, any major piece of legislation. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt, if you go back to the original 100 days, it was 100 days because he started to usher in the New Deal. These were things that he did through Congress. Trump has obviously a friendly Republican Congress to work with, but he's shown very little interest in it. And with the courts, for the most part, they have ignored the courts. There's a ton of litigation happening, I think a lot more than was true even in the first term. And I think the administration's attitude, their arguments have been that basically the court should not control what they see as legitimate executive authority.
Are we headed for a showdown between the president and the courts on that?
I mean, there's already been a bit of a showdown, right? We've had federal judges who have threatened to hold members of the administration in contempt for not facilitating the return of Abrego Garcia. The Supreme Court has issued a midnight ruling stopping deportation to the terrorism jail in El Salvador. So this certainly seems like a momentous time in terms of the balance of powers.
In these first 100 days, we've seen President Trump's approval ratings almost flip. In the New York Times average of public polls, the week after the inauguration, his disapprove was 52% approve, 43% disapprove. This past week, it was just the opposite. 44% approve, 52% disapprove. What do you make of that?
Historically, it's a little surprising, actually, because the first 100 days, part of the appeal of the idea is that it's a honeymoon period. Presidents coming, usually they have a friendly Congress, but there's a real hope because they just won re-election or election. They believe they have a mandate, and people, the American public, I think, puts into them what they will. And usually presidents are really popular. It's one of their most popular moments oftentimes. But Trump is actually historically low. Actually the lowest, I think, poll approval ratings of maybe any modern president in his first 100 days. And I think the worrying thing politically for the administration is that his numbers on the economy have really gone down.
The original 100 days, as you say, Franklin Roosevelt laid the groundwork for the New Deal. Is there any sense of what tone this president has set in the first 100 days, whether this will carry on or have a long-term effect on the United States?
Well, first of all, it's obviously hard to know. I don't remember that much from Trump's first 100 days. The so-called Muslim ban, the kind of chaos at the airports is one memory. This feels much more momentous. And it's momentous for the efforts to harvest power, to wield power, to take power from Congress, the spending power, ignoring the courts, the efforts to dramatically scale back the size of government, but to do it in this sort of slash and burn way. It feels like a historic moment to me. The stakes actually feel quite high relative to some other recent 100-day presidencies.
Matthew Dallek, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Finally tonight, a journey to remote Alaska, where global warming is being blamed for endangering a treasure trove of indigenous artifacts. Nelifer Hudayat, with the nonprofit news organization Evident Media, visited one dig site near Alaska's Bering Sea where archaeologists say they're in a race against time.
Can you see the house floor?
Is that the house floor?
Yeah. Almost like a mosaic of daily life pressed down into the dirt.
Who lived here and how many people lived here?
Well, this was a Yupik settlement, and about 200 people lived here, starting as early as 1450 AD. This is all wood from Shakespeare's time.
Gosh, it's been preserved so well.
Because of the preservation here, the average digger will find 1 or 2 jaw-dropping museum pieces per day.
Okay, well, let's keep digging. At the edge of the world, archaeologist Rick Knecht and his team are digging down, and through the artifacts they find, piecing together the story of a historical community that came to an end more than 300 years ago.
The objects we're finding are important not just to local folks and their heritage, but to our collective heritage as humans. What's scary is that with climate change, this record is under threat. It's a race against time, both against erosion and the fact that the permafrost has melted and these things are slowly rotting. Once the permafrost is gone, these sites are exposed to decay, and this amazingly preserved fossil and archaeological record in the Arctic is being lost very quickly.
The melting permafrost and coastal erosion helped unveil this site for archaeologists. But those forces also threaten to destroy and wash away these artifacts. That's why archaeologists say their work is inextricably linked to climate change. Now, scientists in both fields are sounding the alarm. As the world continues to warm over the coming decades, scientific studies show that melting glaciers in places like Alaska will impact far-off oceans, land, and the people and cultural sites on it. Those looming changes pose a danger to natural and cultural heritage all over the world. In fact, UNESCO says there's no greater threat right now to World Heritage sites than a warming planet. So, at Rick Knecht's suggestion, we came to Quinhagak, Alaska, to better understand the impact that a warming planet is having on the ongoing efforts to unearth key artifacts from the Yupik people's past. Rick's told me to look for Lisa, and they're in charge of basically the lab and what happens to the objects afterwards. Lisa? Yes. Hi. I am obviously with the right person because you've got one of the objects in your hand. Yes, right. What do you got there?
So this is a little bentwood vessel, or this might have been a dipper. So if you imagine these like attached to each other and then a long handle on this, would have held it here and then dip it to get water out. Digging here absolutely spoils you for doing archaeology anywhere else. The fact that we're finding wood, basketry, like no one else had found 400-year-old basketry and ropes before. So that's absolutely incredible.
Lisa is the site's lab manager. After the items are dug up by Rick's team in the field, they're processed and logged by them. With every object they clean, sort, and document, Lisa adds to the story of the Yupik people. But in the last couple of years, they told us that the threads of that story are fraying.
From an archaeological perspective, there's a lot of knowledge about ways of life, about culture, about the people who lived. And with losing that knowledge, we also lose the opportunity for Native people, young people today, to reconnect with that heritage and to relearn some of the skills and to stay connected to those ways of living. So when everything is washed and dried and labeled and catalogued, it ends up in here in the museum.
Oh, wow! Man, everything you said in that other room is just really kind of, we would have lost this entire story.
There's hundreds, if not thousands, of sites like this out there across Alaska. Give it 5 or 10 more years and all of this will be gone. So all of this would be lost.
And beyond Alaska, it's estimated some 20,000 archaeological sites globally are under threat from climate change. With rising seas and coastal erosion, Rick Knecht says his mission now is to save as many of these artifacts as he can before they wash away for good.
It's kind of shocking to hear that this is a race. This is a race against time and the preservation of our story.
Yeah. All we can do is rescue what we can as fast as we can. It's like a museum that's on fire.
That's Evident Media's Nelifer Hudayat. Their full documentary, which is called Museum on Fire, is on YouTube. And that is PBS News Weekend for this Sunday. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. Have a good week.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.